When the professor insulted Africa, 500 people in the hall were silent. Only one person stood up. That person was Ibrahim Traore, and the evidence in his pocket would shock everyone. On a cold November evening in Paris, the historic amphitheater of Sorbonne University was packed. Leaders, academics, and students from around the world had gathered for the academic panel of the G7 Global Leadership Summit. Ibrahim Traore, the young leader of Burkina Faso, sat in the front row. His simple black suit and modest demeanor didn't draw attention. He was quietly taking notes in his notebook, carefully listening to the speakers. At exactly 3:47 p.m., Professor Jean-Claude Dubois took the podium. 67 years old, silver-haired with sharp eyes. His resume was impressive. 15 books, countless articles, 3 honorary doctorates. He was considered an authority on European civilization. Distinguished guests, Dubois began, his voice carrying arrogant confidence. Today I will speak to you about the foundations of modern civilization. But the truly shocking part hadn't come yet. Dubois showed the map. Look, mathematics came from Greece, law from Rome, philosophy from Germany, industry from England. All foundations of civilization were laid in Europe. Some people in the hall were uncomfortable, but no one spoke. 20 minutes later, Dubois made the biggest mistake of his life. Now some will ask, he said with a mocking smile, what about Africa's contribution? Asia gave paper and gunpowder. America developed calendars, but Africa, a dramatic silence. I challenge you, who in this hall can name one scientific contribution from Africa? Mathematics? None. Technology? None. Philosophy? None. Africa has taken from civilization, not given. The hall froze. 500 people held their breath. Students of African descent were shocked. Some were red with anger. Others had bowed their heads in shame. It was at this exact moment that everything changed. Ibrahim Traore slowly closed his notebook. He put his pen on the table. He stood up. Professor Dubois, he said in a calm but strong voice, I would like to respond to you. Dubois laughed mockingly. Please, Mr. Traore, Ibrahim Traore. Yes, from Burkina Faso. Go ahead, Mr. Traore, enlighten us. His voice dripped with mockery. Ibrahim walked calmly to the podium. He carried a simple leather folder. When he reached the podium, he first scanned the hall, then looked directly at Dubois. Professor, may I ask you a question? Of course, said Dubois confidently. Have you visited the libraries of Timbuktu? Have you studied the Dogon people's knowledge of astronomy? Have you seen the metallurgy techniques of the Haya people in Tanzania? Dubois shrugged. Mud buildings and primitive folklore don't count as contributions to civilization, Mr. Traore. But the first document in Ibrahim's hand would silence everyone. Ibrahim pulled out a paper from his folder. He read aloud the Lebombo bone, found in Swaziland, 44,000 years old. It has 29 notches, humanity's first mathematical calculation. They calculated lunar cycles. Professor, mathematics didn't start in Greece, it started in Africa. Dubois's face slightly reddened. Making notches isn't mathematics. Ibrahim pulled out the second document, the Ashango bone, Congo, 20,000 years old. Prime numbers, multiplication, division operations, 19,000 years before Greek mathematics. The hall was silent. Everyone was holding their breath listening. But you want modern examples, don't you? Said Ibrahim. They hadn't seen the biggest surprise yet. Sankore University, Timbuktu, 12th century, 700,000 manuscripts, 25,000 students. At that time, Oxford was still a small village school. Dubois tried to stutter an objection. These are exaggerated numbers. Ibrahim continued, his voice growing stronger. You said law came from Rome. Have you heard of the curricula system? The Ashanti Confederation's constitution applied the principle of separation of powers 300 years before America. The Buganda parliament operated with a democratic system while Europe was ruled by absolute monarchy. Whispers began to rise from the hall. Philosophy from Germany. Ibrahim's voice now filled the entire hall. Have you read Zira Yaqub, 17th century Ethiopian philosopher? He wrote Enlightenment ideas a century before Europe. His student Walda Haywatt's works on ethics were written before Kant. But because they wrote in J's, they don't count as philosophy, right? The professor's hands began to tremble, but the real blow was just coming. Medicine, said Ibrahim, a tone of triumph in his voice. Cataract surgery was performed in Mali in the 14th century. In Uganda in 1879, a cesarean section was performed where both mother and baby survived. Europe achieved this 50 years later. Smallpox vaccination. It was practiced in West Africa before Edward Jenner. Slave traders learned it from there. A student jumped up and started applauding. Then another. Then dozens. Wait, said Ibrahim. I'm not finished yet. The hall quieted again. Metallurgy. The Haya people in Tanzania were producing steel 2,000 years ago. Carbon steel. Europe achieved this during the Industrial Revolution. The Benin bronzes were so advanced that when Europeans first saw them, they couldn't believe Africans could have made them. Dubois' face had turned white. His lips were trembling. But Ibrahim's final card would bring everyone to tears. Astronomy. Ibrahim's voice echoed. The Dogon people knew about the Sirius B star centuries before modern telescopes. How? Because they knew how to observe. The stone calendars in Mali are older than Stonehenge. Ibrahim pulled a small object from his pocket, a piece of bone. This, he said loudly, is from Blombo's cave, South Africa, 100,000 years old. It has abstract art on it. Humanity's first art, 60,000 years before the cave paintings in Europe. Now the hall was completely silent. Sweat was dripping from Dubois's forehead. But most importantly, said Ibrahim, his voice had softened. Ubuntu philosophy. I am because we are. While Europe produced philosophy based on individualism and conquest, Africa developed thought on human dignity, community, and forgiveness. Now the bomb would explode. Ibrahim pulled out the final document from his folder. This is a letter from Cecil Rhodes, founder of the Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford. Do you know what it says? African history must be systematically erased to legitimize colonization. Professor Dubois, yours is not ignorance. It's deliberate erasure, and you've been perpetuating it for 47 years. The hall rang out. Dubois began to stutter. This is nonsense. There's no proof. Proof, Ibrahim laughed. Professor, your own university's archive has 15,000 African manuscripts. You never opened them because you didn't want to look. A professor stood up, Dr. Marie Leblanc, head of African Studies. Mr. Traore is right, she said loudly. I've seen these documents, but they're not in the curriculum. Why? Because authorities like Professor Dubois don't accept them. The hall was collapsing with applause, but the story wasn't over yet. Ibrahim spoke one last time. Professor Dubois, I ask you about Africa's contribution to humanity. Humanity itself, Homo sapiens, evolved in Africa. Language was born in Africa. Controlling fire started in Africa. Agriculture developed in Africa. Without us, you wouldn't exist. Dubois collapsed to the ground. Not metaphorically. He actually fainted. The medical team rushed over. Ibrahim calmly gathered his folder. As he descended from the podium, he stopped. One more thing. In Burkina Faso, we have a proverb. Until the lion tells his own story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Today the lion spoke. The 500 people in the hall were giving a standing ovation. Tears, shouts, joy. But what happened the next day was something no one could have predicted. At 6 a.m., the world press exploded. Historic moment at Sorbonne. Africa's revenge. Professor Dubois resigns. Ibrahim Traore, the voice of New Africa. The video got 50 million views in 24 hours. But the really important thing was something entirely different. Harvard, MIT, Cambridge, the world's most prestigious universities decided to change their curricula. African history became mandatory. The French Ministry of Education established a special commission. 300 years of colonial archives were opened. UNESCO placed the Timbuktu manuscripts under protection. A budget of 10 million euros was allocated. But for Dubois, everything was over. His resignation letter was brief. I taught wrong for 47 years. I ask for your forgiveness. He sold his mansion. He went to Africa. He became a volunteer teacher at a small village school in Ghana. He wrote a letter to Ibrahim Traore. Dear President, you showed me the truth. I dedicate the rest of my life to making amends. I am learning from Africa as a student. Ibrahim replied, Ubuntu. You exist because we exist. Come, let us learn together. Are you ready for the final scene? A year later, at the opening of the newly opened Museum of African Civilizations in Ouagadougou, two people stood side by side cutting the ribbon, Ibrahim Traore and Jean-Claude Dubois. Dubois approached the microphone. A year ago, I was ignorant. I was arrogant. I insulted Africa. Today, I stand here as a student. This museum tells the true story of humanity. The story of humanity without Africa is like daylight without the sun. It doesn't exist. 10,000 people applauded. Ibrahim spoke, it's easy to make enemies. It's hard to win hearts. Professor Dubois won hearts because he accepted the truth. This is Africa's power, forgiveness, Ubuntu. They entered the museum's first hall, written large on the wall. Humanity began in Africa, mathematics. Began in Africa, philosophy. Began in Africa, medicine. Began in Africa, law began in Africa. Africa is the mother of humanity. Everything started here, and at the bottom, in small letters, until the lion tells his own story. The tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. African proverb, but the museum's most special corner was elsewhere. The section called Transformation Hall told stories of people overcoming their prejudices. The first story was Dubois's. On the wall was his photo from that moment at Sorbonne. Arrogant, mocking. Next to it, his new photo, teaching children in Ghana, smiling, happy. Written underneath, ignorance is a choice, so is learning. The museum received 5 million visitors in its first year. Dubois was there every day, giving tours for free. He always told visitors the same thing. I learned the truth at 67. You are lucky. You are younger. Africa's story is your story, all of our story. One day a little girl asked, Uncle, why did you speak badly about Africa at first? Dubois knelt down, looked into the girl's eyes. Because I was afraid, my child. People fear what they don't know. They belittle what they fear. But courage is learning. I chose to be brave. The final scene approaches. Ibrahim Traore was speaking at the UN General Assembly. A year ago at Sorbonne, a professor insulted Africa. Today, that professor is Africa's greatest advocate. This is where hope lies. People can change. Prejudices can be broken. Truth can win. Representatives from 193 countries in the hall were giving a standing ovation. Africa was silent for centuries. Now it's time to speak, but not for revenge, for peace, not with hatred, with love, with the spirit of Ubuntu. I am because we are. When the speech ended, for the first time in UN history, the applause didn't stop for 10 minutes. Dubois was watching on television. His eyes were tearful. His Ghanaian student beside him asked, Teacher, are you crying? Yes, said Dubois, from happiness. I saw the most beautiful thing a person can see in life, the triumph of truth, and the final word. Today, African history courses are taught everywhere in the world. Professor Jean-Claude Dubois' book became a bestseller, From Ignorance to Enlightenment, A Racist Transformation. All proceeds were donated to African education. Ibrahim Traore wrote the foreword. Your enemy is ignorance, not people. When you defeat ignorance, your enemy becomes your friend. This is Africa's gift to the world. Ubuntu, forgiveness, growing together. Last page. Remember, mathematics began in Africa. Humanity began in Africa. Civilization began in Africa, and it will begin again. Because Africa is not just a continent. Africa is a spirit. The spirit of Ubuntu. I am because we are. Ibrahim Traore and Jean-Claude Dubois, the common voice of truth.